So now recording. All right. Piali mohuantin ni Diego wan naman in momachtise tleniika to be or not to be. Hi everyone. Today you're gonna learn about to be or not to be in Nahuatl. And so here, let's start the presentation. And let's see. All right. Let's go back to this view. All right. So today I'm going to teach you about how to count from 1 to 5 in Nahuatl. We're going to learn about the structure of nouns. We're going to learn how to pluralize nouns. And then we're going to learn how to say to be in the plural sense. Last week in the last lecture, I taught you about how to say to be in for I, for you, and for he or she. And today we're going to talk about to be in we, you all, and they. Okay, so that's the purpose of this lecture. So let's start. Se, ome, eyi, nawi, macuili. All right, let's do it again. Se, ome, eyi, nawi, macuili. All right, now without the sound, now without the writing. So it's going to be se, ome, eyi, nawi, and macuili. All right. So now I'm going to ask you to look at the to unmute yourself and look at the picture, and I'm going to ask you keski koskat. So I'm going to tell you the first one. So I'm going to say keski koskat, and you're going to respond inin se koskat. Okay? So I'm pretty sure you can figure out what that means. Inin se koskat. Okay? So keski koskat. Okay, but now there's two. Yes, there you go. So inin ome koskat. Because in this one there was se koskat, but now there's ome koskat. So inin ome koskat. Wali. Keski koskat.
Inin eyi koskat.
Wali. Inin eyi koskat. Wali. Keski koskat.
Inin nawi koskat.
Wali. Inin nawi koskat. Wali. Keski koskat.
Inin macuili koskat.
Wali. Inin macuili koskat. Wali. All right. So maybe from previous lectures, you've already noticed that there's some kind of a pattern with nouns. And so here in this slide, I'm going to give you the overall overview of nouns. So on the left, I have 4 typical nouns in Nahuatl. I have the word tepetl, which is hill or mountain. Cali, which is house or building. Patli, which is medicine or venom. Michin, which is fish. And if you've been paying attention to the nouns in this class, you may have noticed that they all have these same endings. So for example, the first one ends in TL, the second one ends in LI, the third one ends in TLI, and the fourth one ends in IN. These are the typical 4 classes of Nahuatl nouns. So when you see a word ending in these 4 endings, you know that 99% of the time, I think it's like probably almost 100%, that word must be a noun. And that ending that has those common endings, that ending is called the absolutive ending. So when you hear me say something like remove the absolutive ending, that's the ending that I'm referring to. Okay, it's these 4 endings. There are some words in Nahuatl that are nouns that do not have those endings. And those words are generally borrowed from other languages, or they've lost their ending with time in history. So I have here 3 examples. I have caballo, which means horse, chichi, which means dog, and alashos, which means orange, like the fruit that you eat. And so when you see these words, generally they're borrowed from other languages. Caballo has been borrowed from Spanish, from caballo. And alashos, I believe, has been borrowed from the Totonac language. I may be wrong about which language it comes from, but I believe they think it's from Totonac, because they have the word for orange, and I think it starts with something like lalash or something like that. All right, so now I'm going to give you more examples with numbers and pluralization. Okay, so here I have inin se Macehualli. Inin se Macehualli. ¿Cuál? Inin ome Macehualme. Inin ome Macehualme. Inin eyi Macehualme. Inin eyi Macehualme. Inin nawi Macehualme. Juan inin macuili Macehualme. ¿Cuál? All right, more examples. Inin se tototl. Inin ome totome. Inin eyi totome. Inin nawi totome. Juan inin macuili totome. Okay, I'm pretty sure you figured out the pattern. So if you've been noticing, okay, so here I have, basically I give you examples of how you pluralize nouns in Nahuatl. So on the left, I have 4 nouns. I have the word siwatl, woman, cuahtli, eagle, Macehualli, person, and totolin, turkey. And if you noticed in the previous slides, the pattern is that you take off the absolutive ending, which are those 4 basic endings that I taught you about nouns. And then what you're gonna do after you remove them is you're gonna add that ending me to them. So siwatl, which is woman, is gonna become siwame, which is women. Cuahtli, eagle, is going to become cuahme, eagles. Macehualli, person, is going to become Macehualme, people. Totolin, turkey, is going to become totolme, turkeys. Okay? So this is the general way that Huasteca Nahuatl pluralizes nouns. But this is not the only way that other varieties of Nahuatl pluralize nouns. Other varieties of Nahuatl don't just add me. Some varieties add me, but then there are other varieties that add the ending tin to it. So we may say, for fishes, we might say michime. That's the Huasteca way to say it. But other varieties might say michtin. Okay, so you need to be aware that that tin is another way to pluralize nouns. There are other varieties as well that reduplicate the first syllable. Reduplication basically means that you're gonna copy the first syllable and you're gonna put it again in the front. So if you were to have the word michin, which is fish, and you had one of these varieties, you might hear them say mimichtin, like that, mimichtin. They copied the mi again and put it in the front, and they added the tin, and that also means fishes. You don't need to memorize on how to do this. If you learned classical Nahuatl, you probably saw this in classical Nahuatl. But if you didn't learn it, you just need to be aware that this exists, because when you read texts from other regions of Nahuatl, you're going to see them do this, and it's not wrong. It's just the way that they do it in their variety. So you just need to keep this in the back of your mind. Remember those words that I told you that they don't have absolutive endings, like the word caballo, the word chichi, and the word alashos? Those don't have those absolutive endings. When you pluralize those words, all you do is add me to them. So for example, if you have the word caballo, it becomes caballome. Or the word chichi, it becomes chichime. So for those that don't have that ending, all you do is add the me to them. Okay? Hope that's very clear. And so maybe you're thinking back to the very first example that I gave you, where I gave you secoscat, omecoscat, eyicoscat, nahuicoscat, and macuilicoscat, and you're thinking, wait a minute, how come with coscat, it ended in TL, and when I pluralized it, it just stayed as TL. But when I pluralized women, I said, Sesiwatl, Omesiwame, Eyisiwame, Nawisiwame, and Macuilisiwame. What up with that? Why did I pluralize some of the nouns and not the other nouns? Okay, so this is gonna seem different to you because you speak Spanish and English, but Nahuatl makes a distinction between animate nouns and inanimate nouns. So what does animate mean? Animate means that it's going to be a person or an animal. So animate means that they're animated, kind of like you think like an animated cartoon. You know, the cartoons make gestures, they're animated, you know, they have emotions, I guess. Well, Nahuatl, with those kinds of nouns, which are basically generally people and animals, you can pluralize them. But inanimate objects like a rock, a necklace, a desk, a computer, a tree, a plant, those are considered inanimate in Nahuatl, and those traditionally in Nahuatl, you do not pluralize. So because we had the word coscat, a coscat is an inanimate object, it's a necklace, it's inanimate, and therefore in traditional Nahuatl, you do not pluralize coscat. So even though there's 5 coscat, like here in the example of Macehualli coscat, 5 necklaces, you still say coscat. Nahuatl does not allow you to pluralize those, okay? So to make it very clear, you only pluralize animate nouns, you do not pluralize inanimate nouns. Now, in modern Nahuatl, some of the modern speakers do sometimes pluralize inanimate nouns because of the influence of Spanish, because Spanish does pluralize basically everything. And so now you may hear some people pluralize them, but in traditional Nahuatl, you do not pluralize inanimate objects. In this class, I'm going to teach you not to pluralize. Okay, so now I'm going to show you pictures of papalotl, and I'm going to ask you, ¿qué es papalotl? And you're going to unmute yourself and you're going to respond with the answer. And don't worry, it's not too difficult. Okay, so, okay. So, ¿qué es papalotl?
Papalotl.
Kuali. Inin se papalotl. Kuali. Okay. ¿Qué es papalotl?
Inin papalotl.
Okay, so I heard somebody say papalome, and I heard another person say papalotl. So it's inin ome papalome. So when you're pluralizing something, you have to think in your mind, is this an animal or is it a person? And if the answer is yes, then you can pluralize it. So here we have a papalotl, which is a live animal, and therefore you can pluralize it. And so it's gonna not be papalotl, it's gonna be papalome. Okay, now you might ask me, is ome papalotl correct? Surprisingly, it's technically okay to say ome papalotl. It's not actually incorrect in Nahuatl. You can still do that, but it's more common for people to pluralize papalotl to papalome. But technically, grammatically, it's fine to say ome papalotl. As long as you're consistent in Nahuatl, you can do that. But we're gonna stick to the more common way, which is ome papalome. Okay? Wally, ¿qué es papalotl?
Inin papalome.
Wally, inin papalome. ¿Ah? ¿Qué es papalotl?
Inin papalome.
Wally, inin papalome. Wally, ¿qué es papalotl?
Macehualli papalome.
Wally, inin Macehualli papalome. So Kamati. Naman, I'm gonna ask you, ¿qué es papalotl wan xochitl? Okay? So I hope you all remember what a xochitl is. If you don't, it's gonna be very clear very soon. Okay? ¿Qué es papalotl wan xochitl?
Inin se papalotl y Juan se xochitl.
¿Cuál? Inin se papalotl, Juan, or Iwan, he said Iwan, Iwan is fine. Se xochitl. ¿Cuál? So if you didn't know what xochitl was, this is a xochitl. Wally. Qu'est-ce qui papalotl wan xochitl?
Inin ome papalome igual ome xochitl.
Wally, okay. So I heard the correct answer. So inin ome papalome wan ome xochitl. So notice papalotl is animate, right? It's an animal. And xochitl, it's a plant, and yes, it's alive, but in Nahuatl, this is considered inanimate because it doesn't make gestures. So even though there's two flowers, you still say ome xochitl. Okay, so we're not pluralizing it. We're not saying ome xochime. Have I ever heard people say ome xochime? Yes, I have. But in traditional Nahuatl, it's ome xochitl. Okay, Wally. Qu'est-ce qui papalotl wan xochitl? Oh,
Inin eyi papalome igual eyi xochitl.
Wally. Inin eyi papalome wan eyi xochitl. Wally.
Diego,
Now,
one means and.
one means and. You got it.
Gracias.
You figured it out from context. Wally. So last week we covered how to be in the singular sense, and now we're going to continue our lesson with the plural sense. So I'm going to give you a review of last week in case you weren't here last week. All right. So let's start. Ni Macehualli. Ni Macehualli. Okay, so you see a picture of me and I'm pointing at myself. So you can say Ni Macehualli, I'm a person, or you could also say Na Ni Macehualli. Both of these are perfectly fine. Ni Macehualli or Na Ni Macehualli. The na is the pronoun, but the na is not necessary. But what is always necessary, which is why I underlined it to make it obvious, the ni is always necessary. If you want to say I am, you have to add the ni. But the na is optional. It doesn't have to be there. So na ni Macehualli is fine, but na Macehualli is not fine. Because it's not fine because the ni is missing. The ni has to be there. Okay? Ti Macehualli. Ti Macehualli. You are a person, or Tati Macehualli. Tati Macehualli. Again, the ti is necessary, the ta is not necessary, but you can add it there if you want to. And then lastly,
you capitalize every word?
Yeah, only I only capitalized it because here this Ti Macehualli is its own complete sentence already. And since I'm adding the ta, I want it to be also capitalized because it's the beginning of the sentence. But if to be really correct, I should, if I'm gonna add the ta, I should make this lowercase the ti. Okay. But it's just because of the way that I'm animating that I can't lowercase it.
I understand. Thank you.
All right, Wally. Right? So Macehualli, he or she is the person, right? If I see a person and I say Macehualli, then that's all you need to say. So if you notice, the word for person is Macehualli, but also saying just the word also implies is. It also means he or she is a person. And so you see that little space on the bottom, that little space is indicating that there is no prefix in Nahuatl. You don't put anything in there to indicate is. Is already implied by not having anything. And it means he or she is a person. But you could also add ya to it to make it extra clear that you're saying he or she is a person, but it's not necessary. So Macehualli is okay, he or she is a person, or ya Macehualli is okay, and it still means he or she is a person. Wally, I hope that's clear now. I hope you're not confused from last week. Okay, so now that we reviewed that, now let's learn more than one. So, ti Macehualme, ti Macehualme. Notice I'm adding ti there, and I'm also adding me. Now you know that this me is that marker that indicates more than one person. So because Macehualli is one person, but now we are more than one person, we're gonna say Macehualme. And the prefix for we is ti. So the whole phrase, ti Macehualme, is we are people. Wally? I hope that's clear. And now you can also say, you know, if you remember from first week or first lesson, you learned the pronouns, you could also say to Juantin ti Macehualme. That is also okay. ¿Vale? Y mo Juantin in Macehualme. In Macehualme. Okay? So now we're changing it to in, and that changes it to mean all of you all in front of me. Okay? And we've got to add the me because you're more than one person. And again, you can also say in mo Juantin in Macehualme. Now, I want to say that for this prefix in, that is the way to say you all or ustedes or vosotros, I guess, in Spanish, in Huasteca Nahuatl. But other varieties of Nahuatl, they might say en Macehualme, they might say an Macehualme, they might say nan Macehualme or nen Macehualme. This prefix tends to change a lot depending on which variety of Nahuatl you speak. But for now, just know that this is the one we use in Huasteca Nahuatl, but other varieties tend to use a slightly different one. It's not that much different, but just be aware that it exists because you might think, oh, they're saying it this weird other way, but it's not that. It's a lot of varieties use their own way to say this, but it's very close to this one, and it's generally understood what they mean, especially when you have a lot of practice. So don't freak out too much about it, but just know this is the Huasteca way to do it, but other varieties do it as a little bit differently. Okay? And they may not say Imo Juantin, they might say Ame Juantin, or they might say Ye Mahuame, or whatever. You'll learn those later. Okay? And then lastly, they are people, Macehualme. So same thing like he or she, this Macehualme does not have prefix. So by just saying the word Macehualme, which the word Macehualme by itself means people, but it also means they are people. The is implied by not having anything in front. Okay? But if you wanted to make it extra clear, you could say Ini Juantin Macehualme. Okay? Other varieties may say Yahuantin, so be aware. And classical Nahuatl says Yehuantin. So you can see Yehuantin, Yahuantin. For some reason, Chicontepec Nahuatl uses Ini Juantin, but they'll still understand Yahuantin. So, you know, be very flexible with other varieties. Okay, so you can say Macehualme, they are people, or you can say Ini Juantin Macehualme, or you can say Yahuantin Macehualme. For now, I'm just going to teach you Ini Juantin, so be aware of that. Here is the overall summary of to be in Nahuatl. So now you have the whole complete picture. As you can see, Nahuatl uses prefixes in order to imply to be. So therefore, there is no verb to be. It's just based on how you put the prefix is how you imply to be. So by putting this ni Macehualli, the ni implies I am. The ti implies you are. And the zero, which is the not putting anything here, implies the is. For he or she, for we it's ti and me, and for you all it's in, and for they it's nothing. Okay. So you might be thinking, wait a minute, hold on. Doesn't you and we, don't they both use ti? And yes, they do both use ti. So you need to be very, very aware that sometimes ti means you and sometimes ti means we. And the only way to distinguish them is by the ending, okay? So when you say you are a person, you have to say ti Macehualli. So that li, which indicates that it's one, it indicates singular, right? By knowing that it's ti Macehualli with the li at the end, you know it must be one person. Whereas if you see ti, but with the me, you know that that me indicates more than one person. So if you hear ti Macehualme, it must mean we, okay? So based on the ending is how you know who you're talking about. So those endings matter. So it's really the combination of this ti with this li that indicates you, and it's really the combination of the ti with the me that indicates a we. Because you know it must be more than one person because it's Macehualme, okay? Same thing when you're thinking about he or she, right? You have the exact same problem because you have Macehualli, but there's nothing in front, and also with they, there's also nothing in front, right? But the only way to tell them apart is by looking at the ending. You see Macehualli, it must be one person. Macehualme must be multiple people. That's how you can tell them apart. Okay, so you need to be very vigilant and very careful of what's going on with the word, because based on the endings, it changes the meaning. Okay, and now to illuminate you or remind you, this is how you say not to be. So on the left side, this is what we did last week. So we said, I am not a bird, ashni totot. You are not a bird, ashti totot. He or she is not a bird, ash totot. But you can do the exact same thing with the plurals. So for example, if you want to say we are not birds, you're going to do the same ash that you learned last week, the ti, the prefix you just learned, and the me, because we are more than one person. So the whole combination is ash titotome, we are not birds. Or ash intotome, y'all are not birds. And ash totome, they are not birds. So the same thing of ash and the prefix apply here. So it's always the negative ash, the ti, the prefix, and then the me at the end has to be put in there, or the absolutive ending, depending on the noun. And so all those apply. And here, anywhere where you see ash, you could easily substitute the word Axcanah or amo because it's interchangeable. Just remember that Axcanah and amo are separate words, whereas ash must be attached to a word. So it's a prefix, basically. ¿Vale? All right. So if you wanted to say we are two birds, so you know how to say we are birds. You know how to say titotome, right? We are birds. But if you want to say we are two birds, you're going to say the number, ome. So ome titotome, we are two birds. Okay? So I think that's pretty self-explanatory. But if you want to say we are not two birds, you're going to say Axcanah ome titotome. So that's pretty easy to understand. Or you're going to say amo ome titotome. Now you might be thinking, wait, can I say ome ashtotome? And the answer to that is actually no. Even though that does kind of follow the general rules, for some reason, it doesn't sound grammatically correct to me to say ome ashtotome. So don't say it that way, but the other ways of saying Axcanah ome titotome and amo ome titotome, those are perfectly fine. But for some reason, ome ashtotome is not valid. Okay? Ome ashtitotome or whatever. Okay? So that doesn't work, but you could easily use these options that are above. Okay, so now I'm gonna ask you to unmute yourself again. I'm going to do the last exercise, which is kenihki moilia. So kenihki is how, moilia is it said. So literally it's how is it said, but it translates as how do you say? How do you say? Okay, or like in Spanish, it would be like como se dice, right? So I'm going to ask you these questions, and hopefully I taught you well and you will be able to create these complex sentences, okay? So, kenihki moilia, I am a woman.
Moilia nani siwatl.
Okay. I heard one correct answer and then I heard somebody else. Oh, the other person gave up. Okay, so I heard somebody say, and thank you for making a whole sentence, moilia nani siwat, which is perfectly fine. You're saying it is said, I am a woman. Okay, that's perfectly fine. I just gave the short answer, which is ni siwat, but the other long answer is perfectly fine. So ni siwat is all you really need to say. This is the short way to say it. Remember the ni is always necessary, so you must put it there. So it's ni siwat. Whereas you could have also said nani siwat. So that's the longer way. And the other person said moilia na ni siwat. When you say moilia, you're just saying, this is how you say it. Moilia, this is how you say it. So that's fine too. All right. Kenihki moilia, you are a woman.
Tati siwatl.
Riley. Tati siwat, okay. The shorter way to say it is just ti siwat, but tati siwat is perfectly fine. Riley. Kenihki moilia, she is a woman.
Siwat.
Riley, siwat. Okay. So by just saying siwat, you're saying she is a woman. So it means woman, but it also implies is a woman. So in Nahuatl, a noun can be a whole sentence, just the noun. So if you just say the noun, it means is this thing. So you got siwat, kwali, but you could also say, to clarify, ya siwat, she is a woman. but siwat is perfectly fine. Wali. Kaniki moilia, we are women.
Moilia tohuantin ti siwame.
Wali. Wow, look at you with your complete sentences. Kena. Moilia tohuantin tisiwame, not tisiwat. Because if you say tisiwat, remember if you don't add that me, I'm gonna think tisiwat, I'm gonna think you are a woman, right? But you have to add the me to clarify that it's plural. So tisiwame makes it we are women. And you could also say tohuantin tisiwame to make it more clear. But you don't have to add the tohuantin if you don't want to. All right, Kwali. Kaniki moilia, y'all are women.
Insiwame.
Kwali, insiwame. Insiwame. Or, the long way, imohuantin insiwame. Kwali. Kaniki moilia, they are women.
Siwalme.
Siwame. Just siwame. And you can make it long and say inihuantin siwame or yahuantin siwame, depending on what variety you speak. Yahuantin. I don't remember all of the ones for other varieties, but I recognize them when I see them. All right. Kaniki moilia, we are two women. We are two women.
Tisiwame. Ome tisiwame.
Kena. Ome tisiwame. So you got the number here, ome. And then this is the we are women part, tisiwame. So you have to split it up like that because this ti, it needs to be attached to the noun. Okay? Ome tisiwame. Wali. Kaniki moilia, we are three women. We are three.
Eyi tisiwame.
Wali. Eyi tisiwame. Wali. Kaniki moilia, we are four women.
Nawi tisiwame.
Wali. Nawi tisiwame. Nawi tisiwame. And again, for all of these, you could put the pronoun in there if you want to. So you could say tohuantin nawi tisiwame if you wanted to be extra clear. Niki moilia, y'all are two women.
Ome in tisiwame.
So I heard you all adding the T in there. That T indicates either you or indicates a we. But here, we're not talking about you. We're talking about ustedes or vosotros or... I don't like to say you guys, but a lot of people say you guys, but I don't want to assume that you're all men. So I say y'all. That's why I always write y'all. So y'all are two women. Ustedes or vosotros are two women. So it would not be the T because T indicates you or it indicates a we. So it's just in siwame. Okay, or ome in siwame because it's two. All right. So Keniki moilia, y'all are three women.
Eyi insiwame.
Kwali, eyi in siwame.
Antin eyi tisiwame.
Keniki moilia, y'all are four women.
Nawi insiwame.
Kwali, nawi in siwame. Kwali, Keniki moilia, they are two women.
Ome siwame.
Kwali, ome siwame. So again, this technically means just two women. But in Nahuatl, is implied, so it also means they are two women. So, ome siwame, kwali. And you can make it extra clear by saying, inihuantin ome siwame. Okay, keniki moilia, they are three women.
Eyi siwame.
Kwali, eyi siwame, or inihuantin eyi siwame, kwali. Keniki moilia, they are four women.
Moilia nawi siwame.
Kwali, moilia nawi siwame, kwali. Inihuantin nawi siwame, kwali. So here's your overall summary for the class. We have se, ome, eyi. Some varieties do say yay, and that's fine. You could say yay or yeyi. Nawi, makwili, and you could add me to nouns by taking away the absolutive. And then remember that you can only pluralize animate nouns, which means people or animals. And to negate something, to make it negative, you would say ash in front of that noun or a verb. You'll learn later verbs too. Macehualli, Coscat, Siwat, Totot, Xochitl, Papalotl, you have the translations. Next week, we're gonna do Nocal, Mocal, which is mi casa es tu casa, when you're gonna learn how to possess things, how to say my, yours, his or hers, etc. ¿Cuál? So Kamatimiak, here's the contribution if you wanna make any, and I'm gonna leave it now to Tlatlanilistli. And I'm gonna stop sharing so you could ask me questions. I hope that the class was clear. I'm going to look through the chat to see if there's any questions. Okay. Is alashos orange? Yes, alashos is orange, as in the fruit. And somebody's saying, oh my God, that's in Mayan too. See, that's why we believe that alashos is borrowed from another language, because I believe Totonac has lalash, and maybe Mayans also have alashos, or a word very similar to orange. So this clearly is an older word in Nahuatl that was not borrowed from Spanish, but was borrowed into Nahuatl later. And so it means orange, like the fruit. Is that why Tohuantin ends in tin? Yes, so you all caught it, yes. So remember, in Huasteca variety, we say me to pluralize things, but other varieties add tin. And so you see that in the pronouns, those tins are indicating plurality. And so that's why we say Tohuantin, Imohuantin, Yahuantin, or Imihuantin, because those are plural pronouns. And so those have been older words that have been borrowed into Huasteca Nahuatl, but for some reason, Huasteca Nahuatl lost the tin and they kept the me. But other varieties, they use me, and they also use tin, or they use a combination, and some nouns have tin, some have me, etc. In our variety, we only have me, but you will hear tin. What about plants and weather disasters? So plants are not considered animates, so you do not pluralize plants. So the word for plant is shiwik, and so you could say se shiwik, one plant, ome shiwik, two plants, eyi shiwik, etc. Weather disasters, I don't know if they're considered animates, but I don't think that they are. Because, for example, the word for earthquake, I believe, is tlaonili. It's either tlaonili or tlaonilistli. That's earthquake. And that is not pluralized. So I would guess weather disasters are not animates. So I would not pluralize them. I've seen xochime. Yes, like I told you, some varieties through the influence of Spanish may pluralize nouns like xochitl, which is technically inanimate, but in traditional Nahuatl, you would say xochitl. Some varieties, you may hear them pluralize words and say xochime, but in traditional Nahuatl, I'm going to try to keep it traditional. We're not going to do that. Does Huasteca not use one, as in Macehual one? Yes, you haven't learned this yet. You're probably going to learn this in next class. When you possess something, like if you say you do use one. So for example, if you say my person, my people, I guess, you would say no Macehual. But if you say more than one person, you would say no Macehual one. Now it turns out that in our variety, for some weird reason, they add pollo to it, so they might say no Macehual pollo one, which is a weird quirk of Chicontepec Huasteca Nahuatl. So they don't say Macehual one, but other varieties, they say Macehual one. And in other nouns, we do say just one. So no mamachticawan, no, I guess no chichiwan, etc. It's just that one is only added when you pluralize something that you possess. And so since I haven't covered possessions, I haven't taught you about one, but now what Huasteca does use it, it's just only in possessed words, meaning that my house, no, not houses, my people or my dogs, my whatever it is, yes, as long as you can pluralize it, you add one to it. So for it is a house, we technically don't distinguish between a single house and houses, right? Correct. So if you say Cali, Cali can mean 4 things. Cali can mean house. Cali can mean it is a house. Cali can mean houses. And it can also mean they are houses. So just that noun, Cali, because it's inanimate, can mean those 4 things. What body parts, would body parts get pluralized? No, body parts are inanimate and body parts are not pluralized. So if you want to say my foot, it's noikshi. If you want to say my feet, it's still noikshi. So there is no distinguishment. If you say noma, my hand, it also means my hands, noma. They're the same thing in Nahuatl. You do not pluralize inanimates. Is there a Nahuatl way to say Isabella? No, there is not a Nahuatl way to say Isabella because Isabella is a Spanish word. So probably they're just going to say Isabella. They're just going to say the word. I think in classical texts, they sometimes transcribe B's as P's. So maybe Isabella. Yeah, unless you want to translate the meaning of Isabella. What does the name mean? Okay, so Richard kind of tried to help you out there. Yes, so what happens is this. In modern Nahuatl, because there's so much influence in Spanish, a lot of Nahuatl speakers are bilingual, and so they will be able to say Isabella with the B. But let's say you were to go back or you were to speak to a native speaker who does not speak Spanish, which there aren't that many, but they do exist. They're not going to have the letter B because the letter B does not exist in Nahuatl. So they're going to substitute it with the letter P. So they might say Isabella. But because now there's a lot of bilingual Nahuatl speakers that speak Spanish and Nahuatl, they're going to be able to say Isabella, so they're going to just say Isabella. What does Isabella mean? I have no idea. You probably have to go into the etymology of that word. And in theory, you could translate it to whatever that means and find that equivalent in Nahuatl, and maybe I could find that for you. I just don't know what Isabella means etymologically. Wally? Other questions from the chat? Remember, you're being recorded, so it's going to be in the recording because this is the one I'm going to post.
Hey, Diego, I'm going to ask you a question.
Yes.
I was interested in El Saltillo in how it sounded originally in classical Nahuatl. And I was wondering if you could maybe give like an example of kind of how that works.
Okay, so you will see where we write the letter H's, most of them that are in the final syllable. So like, let me give you the example. Tlahtoli. When you see that H in the middle of the word Tlahtoli, in time, it has morphed into an aspiration. So it's now Tlahtoli, right? Most varieties now say it Tlahtoli with the aspiration. There are still some varieties that have the glottal stop, the saltillo, like you said. And that is pronounced like this. Tlahtoli, Tlahtoli. There's a stop in there. And sometimes it may be hard for you to actually hear it because it's just a stop. It's Tlahtoli. It might be easier for you to hear it in this word. Uh-oh. When you say uh-oh, like when you made a mistake, that stop between O and O, uh-oh, that's the glottal stop. Or if you know some people who speak British English, we say little, but they may say little. Where that TL is, that stop, that little, that's the glottal stop. And you do use the glottal stop in English, in American English, when you say a lot of words that end in T, but we write them as T's, but generally we actually pronounce them as glottal stop. Like bit, B-I-T. You usually don't say I got bit. You usually say I got bit, or maybe you don't, but I do. I say I got bit. That T that you're not pronouncing is actually a glottal stop.
Hey, Diego. So, for example, to say like not or no, I know it's usually said like ahmo. Yeah. Would that be more like ahmo?
Atmo.
Ahmo.
And there's some varieties that say akmo with a K. For some reason, their glottal stop changed into a K. So you might hear them say akmo. But because that glottal stop can in some varieties be interpreted as a K, so they might say akmo. But atmo. Some varieties might say atmo. Some varieties might say ahmo, like we say ahmo. And some varieties may not even actually say the H and just say amo. But yeah, it would be atmo. And then also you saw how we have ti Macehualme. We have that little H at the end. That little H, a lot of the times when you pluralize something in Nahuatl, those final H's are glottal stops in Nahuatl, like classical Nahuatl or in other varieties. Those pluralizing H's are generally glottal stops.
And how would that sound? Would that be like ti Macehualme?
Ti Macehualme. And my Guerrero teacher, his variety distinguishes between the singular without a glottal stop and the plural with the glottal stop. So he wanted me to do the glottal stop. And at that time I couldn't do it, but he taught me how to do it. And so a lot of times in at least his variety, they do distinguish the glottal stop. But most varieties will still understand you. If you just aspirate, because that's how we speak, they'll still understand you. And then there are some varieties that don't have the H there, they have an N. So in some Puebla varieties, they say ti Macehualmen with an N. So just be aware that that exists too. There's a lot of variety in Nahuatl, a lot.
Yeah.
And with time, once you get good, you'll be able to understand a lot of different written Nahuatl and a lot of the weird different ways that Nahuatl speakers speak. But once you have enough practice, you'll be able to understand it.
Can you say that word again with the glottal stop?
So the Macehualme.
Yeah, ti Waseman.
Ti Macehualme. Ti Macehualme.
I see. Okay.
It's like a weird stop, and sometimes it's inaudible. And in fact, a lot of the Spanish friars, when they try to write Nahuatl words, they didn't write it in the glottal stop because they couldn't hear it. But
So
Nahuatl
it's actually
speakers
in the
can
last
hear it.
syllable.
Yeah, in the
So
last
it's
syllable.
actually instead of in between. Okay, I see.
But I mean, there's words that have it in between, like tlahtoli, or tlatlanili, tlatlanili. Oh, I put a Y there, but I meant an I. Tlatlanili. That H right there is a glottal stop. Tlatlanili, because it comes from the word itlani. Itlani means to ask for something. To ask for something. So, and then that H is a glottal stop. So itlani, or we would say itlani, it means to ask for something, but that tla, you'll learn later what tla means. So literally when I'm saying tlatlanilistli, I'm literally saying the act of asking for something, which is a question.
Yeah, because I noticed you had, what was the word? There was one that had the glottal stop, and usually, don't the endings for the absolutive, if the stem ends in a vowel, then it's just like patl, like patl would just be patl, but patli ends with a pli, and is that because the glottal stop it counts as a consonant, basically?
I believe, yeah, because I've been studying the grammar, and yes, the glottal stop technically counts as a consonant.
Gotcha. So without the glottal stop,
it would
PA would just be patl. Pat. Okay, gotcha.
But because the H, which is a glottal stop, is a consonant, then it's pat.
Okay, and that would be said something like patli, right?
If you want the glottal stop, yes.
Gotcha. All right, cool. That's awesome. Thank you so much.
Ashtlin? Any other questions? Somebody said a bit silly, but how would you say to be or not to be a Nahuatl? There is no way to say to be or not to be a Nahuatl because you need to attach it to something, but there's nothing to attach the prefixes to. So actually there is no way to, I guess, no, there isn't. There's no way to say to be or not to be a Nahuatl. There isn't, unfortunately. Because of the way that the structure of the language, you can't say it. So that cannot be translated into Nahuatl. Maybe like, yeah, actually there's no way to translate that.
Out of empty space.
Yeah, by adding a space, by staying silent.
Very philosophical.
More philosophical than the phrase.
Hey, Diego, I have a question. Does modern Huasteca language also pluralize certain words that I know, like in classical, were pluralized, such as tepetl and titlalin?
I have seen people say tepeme, so yes.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so like for example, the word altepetl, which means city, It literally means water and mountain, atl and tepet. And yes, you will still hear people say altepeme because that root tepet, which they did use to pluralize in classical Nahuatl. So yes, but it's kind of inconsistent. And like I said, sometimes they pluralize words that you normally don't pluralize anyway. So like amoshli is wood, right? And so you might hear people say amoshme, but technically that's not grammatically correct in traditional Nahuatl. But I have heard people say amoshme or amame for papers, etc. But I try to stick to the traditional way to do it.
Notice there's a lot of inconsistencies in the language.
I wouldn't say inconsistencies, I would say variety. Because even in classical times, there was different varieties of Nahuatl. It's just we only got one variety written. Well, there was actually multiple ones, but we got a majority of one kind of Nahuatl written. But there was already varieties then, and there's still about 30 varieties now. And so that's why we got to be very flexible.
Okay, how from one variety to another, in percentage-wise, can they understand each other? Like 90%?
Like 95%.
Okay, so it's pretty
especially if you're a native speaker, especially. And the reason I say that is because I constantly watch Zoom meetings that native speakers have amongst each other, and they speak Nahuatl from so many different varieties, and they have zero problem communicating. They just speak in their variety. And now that I have enough practice, I pretty much understand their variety too. And here and there might be words that they use in their vocabulary that I have no idea what it means, but it's very far and few in between. And so I pretty much, I would say like 95%. And if you don't understand something, you'd be like, well, what does that mean in your variety? And they can explain it to you.
Okay, so let me ask you, in the varieties, are the root words would be basically the same?
Yes.
The way they pluralize or what they put before I got to the prefix.
Exactly. So yeah, so the root of it is generally the same, or once you learn verbs, you'll understand like the root of that verb is still the same and it still makes sense in Nahuatl, even though you may not say it that way, it still makes sense. So for example, we say tlatlania, but some varieties say tlatlanilia, and in our variety that still makes sense and it's still actually used. But for example, like when I was talking to my friend, we say the word for phone, we say tepos sanili. It means cell phone, tepos sanili, and it literally means like device speech, right? But from my friend from Guerrero, he would say tepos nonotzalistli. And so nonotza is a verb that means to speak with people. And so that verb is still used in Huasteca Nahuatl, tepos nonotzalistli. So I still understand what it means because I understand what tepos means, device, and nonotzalistli means the act of talking to people. So I understand, oh, a device that relates to talking to people. So I kind of can understand through context that means some kind of speaking device, or in some varieties that means radio, etc. So based on the root of the word, you can still kind of break it down and still figure out what it means.
You wouldn't be able to give the exact sentence, but you know the gist of the conversation, basically.
Exactly. You may think like it means one specific thing and you might be a little bit wrong, but you pretty much know what you're talking about, especially based on the context. So if you're talking about a radio station, you know that tepos nonotzalistli must mean radio station or some kind of communication device. Whereas if you're talking on the phone, then you're like, okay, we're probably talking about the phone. Or for example, we use the word tepos tlacuiloli to mean computer. It literally means device for writing, tepos tlacuiloli. And so in our variety, it means computer. But in some varieties, tepos tlacuiloli means the keyboard itself. And so you can see how it kind of makes sense because it means device for writing.
So they're essentially dialects of Nahuatl.
Yes.
I know that the Hopi, for example, speak sort of a Nahuatl based language, and I know they use the glottal stuff, for example, when they say bajo, which is a prayer stick or a bundle of sage or something like that. I know they use that glottal stuff. I saw the word earlier in Pacli, I think it's what you had. So it's a very similar word, except theirs is pronounced with the glottal
So yes, so Hopi is one of the related languages, but keep in mind that Hopi has been, I think it's separated by at least 100,000 or 200,000 years. So while some of the base words are similar, I mean, they're not mutually intelligible. I cannot understand Hopi. I have a friend who speaks Hopi, and like, for example, I forget what his word for eagle is, but our word is Kwautli, right? And the base of his word is still Kwau something. I forget what it is, but it's still Kwau. And so clearly they're related, but they're not mutually intelligible. Right. They're separated by the hundreds of thousands of years, but they are related to one language. How does it sound to you? Like accents? Oh yeah, or dialects? Yes. So think of, you know how when I hear other varieties of Nahuatl, it sounds to me like an accent. So like, for example, I say tlatoli, right? I say tlatoli. And some of the varieties, they say tlatole. And so le and li are not that different, but to me, it sounds like an accent. Just think about it like when you hear people speaking English from another country, you can understand it because you know enough English, and it sounds a little bit weird, and the intonation is weird, and the way that they pronounce the words are weird, but you can still recognize what they're trying to say. That's how it sounds like to me. It sounds like an accent to me. So even though it's like a different variety, it just sounds like an accent to me. What's the difference between cal and cali? I think I might have missed the distinction if there is one. I don't know why. Okay, so nocal, maybe when I said nocal, you notice that I said cal and not cali. It's because nocal, when you possess a noun in Nahuatl, you have to drop the absolutive ending. So cali is house, but nocal is my house. The li has to go away because that's the absolutive ending. That's how Nahuatl possesses words. So that's why I said nocal and not nocali.
Diego, I have a question. Should we, do you recommend like studying or memorizing the stems instead of the way they seem to appear in all dictionaries, basically, which always have the absolutive ending and they seem to be already conjugated as phrases?
No, I mean, I'll tell you this. The majority of Nahuatl in the last 500 years, the majority of the words have been conserved the same way. Even though the meaning may have changed, the writing is pretty much very much the same, unless you're writing using like the practical alphabet versus the classical, but the actual word itself hasn't changed that much.
Gotcha. So the stems are still essentially the same is what you're saying.
Yeah, yes. Yes. Is it true that there's no way to say happy birthday in Nahuatl? There is a way to say happy birthday in Nahuatl, and it changes based on the region. So like in our variety, it's Kwali Shikashiti Shiwit, Kwali Shikashiti Shiwit, Ashiti Shiwit. And it literally means it's great that you reached this amount of years, something like that. Whereas some other varieties would tell me Pakilistli, which is another reason why I like this word, Pakilistli, Ipan mo tlakatilisilwit, ilwit. And so literally that means happiness on your birth date or birth festival. So tlakatilistli is birth, and ilwit is like festival or day or like holiday. So Pakilistli ipan motlakat, oh no, not the TL, take away the TL. It should be Pakilistli ipan motlakatilis ilwi, like that. And so that literally means happiness on your birth date, something like that. But it literally does change on variety to variety. But some people on my Facebook on my birthday wish me a happy birthday in Nahuatl. And even though I don't know the phrase, literally, I was able to figure it out based on the context and based on the root of the word, because they were telling it to me in other varieties of Nahuatl. And Pakilistli means happiness, but it also means, like in Spanish, felicidad or felicidades. And since Pakilistli is an inanimate word, like you just learned, felicidad is Pakilistli, but so is felicidades in plural form. So felicidades is also Pakilistli. Is it okay? So LTL. So somebody's saying that when you add L plus L, TL, it becomes double L. Yes, that's true. So house, the root is Kali, it is Kal, and plus Kli, it becomes Kali. Yes. Qualishi, okay. Okay, cool.
Diego, are we supposed to pronounce the double L as kind of like longer than a short, like a single L?
Technically, yes. But a lot of people don't. But technically, yes. So
Can you give an
Macehualli,
example?
Macehualli.
Okay, you just kind of hold it for longer. You don't try and pronounce both of them like kalali. Like you wouldn't
Just
try
hold
and
it longer.
insert. You'd hold it longer. Gotcha. Okay.
Macehualli, Macehualli. Just hold it
That-
longer.
Diego, I had some questions about the homework. Specifically the phrase, you're not a snake, you're a person.
Quali?
So I just wrote Ashtikowatl Macehualli.
Quali?
And is that correct? Or because I know in the answers you added the Axcanah at the beginning.
See, the thing is that I can't write all possible 6 answers because there's so many answers. So I only pick one answer because I only want to put one answer. But yes, Axcanah Tikowat Timasewali is correct. So you could say Ashtikowat, Axcanah Tikowat, Amo Tikowat. All of those are correct. You could say,
which sounds nicer to you?
Well, I like Ash because it's shorter.
Okay.
But you can say any of those are fine. I use all 3 of those interchangeably all the time.
Okay, gotcha.
And you could say Ti Macehualli, you could say Tati Macehualli. I guess those are the 2 possibilities.
And for
there's a lot of Nahuatl is very flexible.
Sorry,
yeah, Nahuatl is very flexible.
Yeah, I'm learning. And I have one more last question about the homework. There was one that's inin se conet. Is the se absolutely necessary there, or can you just say inin conet?
Yep. So se is not necessary. So this is the thing. Nahuatl only added the se later because through the influence of Spanish, because in Spanish you used to say un niño, like un. Se,
claro. Sí,
un,
sí,
right?
Este es un niño.
But now it doesn't really need it. So you could just say conet, and it means child, but it also means a child.
Okay.
And so you can say se conet or not say se conet. You could just say conet, and it still means a child. So even though in some of them I put inin se conet, you could have just written ini conet, and it's still okay.
Inin conet.
I just put it there to show you and for somebody to ask, which is great that you did ask because then other people know.
Great. Awesome. Thanks.
That's good.
Any other questions? All right. I guess that's it. I guess no other questions.
Wait, I have one last question. I'm
Okay.
sorry, Diego. I'm asking a million questions.
Oh, no, I want you to ask questions.
I wrote these down because I really wanted to kind of get some more information. So I noticed that I've been trying to go through like the dictionary and a lot of those resources that you gave us, because I noticed that a lot of the kind of words that seem to be single words that we're starting to use, like in between words, like Axcanah and things like that, I noticed that they're actually made up of even smaller words that mean things. So I noticed that Axcanah, and correct me if I'm wrong, is composed of ash, which kind of means no or is a negative. And then kana, I saw an entry that said it means maybe. And it was like kana with a number 1 next to it. And so I don't know if it's multiple different meanings.
Well,
could you explain
with that particular word, Axcanah, I'm not 100% sure its origin, and I don't necessarily think it's related to the word kana. You'll notice that other varieties of Nahuatl don't have Axcanah. The Axcanah is a Huasteca word. Now I know that Guerrero, they have the shortened word for no. They'll say ka, which I think is a short word of Axcanah. So they don't say amo, they say ka, which I think comes from Axcanah, but I don't know where Axcanah necessarily comes from. You will see later that there are other words in Huasteca Nahuatl that also add kana that other varieties of Nahuatl don't add. So for example, we say ayocana, ayojana, or ayocana. That's a Huasteca word, but other varieties just say ayok, like that, ayok. So that kana seems to be a very characteristic thing of Huasteca Nahuatl. Or there's also ayicana, whereas other varieties just say ayi, or aya, or ayaka. And then so that kana seems to be a Huasteca thing, but where does it come from? I have no idea.
Interesting. Gotcha. And is there a meaningful difference between like a word like Tojuan and Tojuantin? Are those two basically synonyms, or does one mean something different?
Tojuan. Okay, it kind of depends where you got that word Tojuan, because Tojuan has its own meaning in Guerrero Nahuatl,
Mm-hmm.
and it could, I guess in some varieties of Huasteca probably too. So, and it means with us, with us. So I'm not sure where you saw the word Tojuan. Now in Huasteca Nahuatl, I can't think of the meaning of Tojuan, but I do know that in some Huasteca variety, they do say Tojuan to mean us, like with us, with us. And we, in our variety, we say Towaya, but in some varieties they say Tojuan. In Guerrero, they say Tojuan. So we say Towaya. So it means with us. That's all I can think of that Tojuan could mean.
Gotcha. And then Tojuantin in Huasteca, that's the proper way to say just we, right? Or us.
And in other varieties, they say Tejuantin. So you could see that it's kind of morphed from Tejuantin to Tojuantin.
Interesting.
Yeah, and in some varieties, they say Tejuan, which is the short version of us.
Gotcha.
So
Yeah, because I also noticed that
So-
instead of na and ta in those, it says, I saw one that was Nehuatl. Nehuatl.
Nehuatl is the... Yes, so the pronouns change a lot in Nahuatl. So in classical Nahuatl, you'll learn it's Nehuatl, Tehuatl, Tehuantin, Amehuantin, and the last one is Yehuantin. Yeah. So
yeah, which would be like kind of like ya, right?
kind of like ya and Yahuantin.
Gotcha.
So it's the pronouns change a lot based on varieties.
But like you said earlier, yeah, you can kind of
learn it.
still tell, yeah, based on the just kind of the roots or the vowels, you kind of still tell, wait a minute, I think this kind of comes from this word, or there's like a family lineage.
Yes.
Awesome.
Those
All right,
pronouns
thank you
change
so
a lot
much.
based on variety. Vale. No more questions? I know this is a shy group, but you know, you can chat it up. But I think I answered a lot of good questions. So get into here. If nobody has no more questions, speak now or forever hold your peace. All right, you're holding your peace. All right, Piali. Oh, never mind. Just curious, how long did it take you to understand Nahuatl to a point in which you could follow a conversation? It took me 7 years. But that doesn't mean it's gonna take you 7 years. It only took me 7 years because it was so hard to find the resources at the beginning and the right people who were native speakers and the right tutors and helpers for me to learn it. I have a friend who learned it in Macehualli and Plurals. It took him 2 years to learn it, to be able to speak it and understand it. Maybe because now he had more resources and more people to practice with, etc. So it can take between 2 and 7 years, and it also depends how fast you are. I am a fast learner. It was just that I didn't have the right resources. And I've been practicing with my teacher, my native speaker teacher, for about like a year in actual speaking once a week for an hour. And now I can speak and understand everything. And so I guess that accelerated my learning. And so since now you actually have much better resources, I think you'll learn it faster than 7 years, but it took me 7 years because of the whole situation. So yeah.
I have a question.
You can do it. Mm-hmm.
I know this is off topic, but when was your birthday?
9/11.
It was?
So it was like 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Happy birthday.
Tlazocamati. All right. Yeah. I know it's hard to find resources, and that's why I'm making this super easy and available everywhere for everybody to have resources. And I'm not part of an institution because I don't want them to put limitations on what I have to say or cannot say, or what I can teach or cannot teach. And I also don't want it to have limitations based on enrollment or whatever. This is available all the time, 100%, 24/7 for everybody. Okay. All right. I hope that you're all learning stuff, and if no more questions, I'll see you next week with Nokal Mokal, my house is your house. Vale. Timoitase, Chikwayiyok. We'll see each other
Bye.
next week.